Hey everyone, today we're doing a bit of a Halloween special. We have a deck profile of the Chandelure Vileplume deck from the 2011 Harkle Silver 2 Noble Victories format. I can't say this list is entirely optimal, it's just what I've gotten from testing, and I'll kind of talk about changes that I made as I went. So list read originally from PTCG Archive, but I've changed quite a few things for my own list. If you want to play the Harkle Silver 2 Noble Victories format, it's not a very cheap format, but it is actually available now on TCG1, the digital client that runs on a browser. So if you want to play it, you can. I will say the format is not a great format, but you know, this will give you a starting point. I do believe Chandelure Vileplume to be in the best 3 decks of the format, along with an Electro deck of your choice and Durant. Durant, unfortunately, is a problem and pretty much always wins against this deck. But that aside, let's get right into the deck list. Starting off pretty simple, we just have 4 copies of Litwick. It'll take me a minute to get these cards out because of my broken hand still. So there we are. So 4 copies of Litwick. This is actually the optimal Litwick, and this is why I don't recommend building this format in real life. This Litwick is like $20 a piece. Thankfully, I got it when it was still 10, and I got one of them for even less than that. But the format, if you are just getting into it, this is going to be a bank breaker just to build this deck. And, you know, this guy's expensive, but, like, it's probably half the cost of the deck in itself, but there's still more to come that's expensive. Why is this Litwick optimal? Well, the other two Litwicks, rather, both have bad attacks. This one has a good attack, Call for Family, search your deck for a basic Pokemon, and put it onto your bench. This is actually a very, very good attack. You want this Litwick. It also has Will-O-Wisp for 20. Don't use that. Then we have 4 copies of Lampent. So Lampent is for its Luring Light. There is only, I believe, 1 Lampent in this format. It's irrelevant. This is really good. So 80 HP is pretty low, but Luring Light is what we're using with this guy. Also does Will-O-Wisp for 30, but Luring Light for 1 energy, switch the defending Pokemon with one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. And this is just a Lysander effect, a Pokemon catcher effect for a reference in this format. So it's really, really good, because especially, and we're going to be locking items out in this deck, you're going to be able to gust up something and it will stick, especially heavier basics like Cobalion, Terrakion. That's why you do not play Cobalion in your Durant deck, is because if you start it, you lose against Chandelure. So yeah, this is a really, really good attack. We play 4 of them just because we're playing an item lock deck. We need to have very thick lines, and we want multiple Chandelures in play. Speaking of Chandelure, the main star of the deck, we have 4 copies of Chandelure. Chandelure has a lot of great things about it. 130 HP is pretty big for a stage 2 at this time anyway. 130 HP, I guess, is like right on par with what you need to be. Could have 140 like Conkeldurr, but you know, that wouldn't be fair. It has the ability Curse Shadow. This is the main part of the card. Once in your turn, if Chandelure is active, you may put 3 damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon in any way you like. And you can use this multiple times. We'll get into that later. We built the deck so you can do that. But essentially, you're just going to spread all over the opponent's board. You don't really want to take knockouts all of the time unless you have to because of N in this format. So you can actually take very reserved plays where you just spread a bunch of damage on board while keeping something active. You can lock that Pokemon active with Lampent's Luring Light attack that we talked about earlier. There's really a lot of great things about that ability. And again, it doesn't limit it to once per turn. Then we do have Eerie Glow. Eerie Glow does 50 for 2 Psychic Colorless and Burns and Confuse. This is actually really good. I've definitely used this attack. We do play Energy to use the attack. The ability is the main key of the deck, but you do use the attack a couple times. It's really, really, really good to confuse a scary attacker. Something like Kyurem, for instance, or something like a Durant. If you can confuse that and stick it, usually with Durant you cannot. Kyurem or Cobalion, things like that are scary attackers. If you can stick the confusion, you can actually pull out a win. Burn is the old burn rules, remember, in this format. So burn, no matter what, in between turns you flip a coin. If tails, they take 20. If heads, they just don't take 20, and it doesn't recover. Unfortunately, Burn does not turn off abilities. It only turns off Poke Powers, and you're going to notice that a lot in this format. This is the transition period from Heart Silver to Black and White. This is the last format before EXs. So there is a little bit of both, but most of the good things in the format are abilities. Most of the good Poke Powers are ones that you use immediately. However, you can shut off Magnezone Prime, so there's something there with the Burn. Then we have 3 copies of Oddish. We are playing the item log line, like I said. There's only 1 Oddish in format, and we can only use the Ram attack, because we only run Psychic and Colorless Energy. Ram does 20. It's not very relevant. One thing to note about the Oddish, it's got a very strange Psychic weakness, referencing to its poison typing in the game, which means it is weak against Litwick, so Litwick can actually take a 1-hit KO with the Will-O-Wisp. Forgot to mention that earlier, but it seems worth mentioning now. We play 1 copy of Gloom, so Gloom's got also the Psychic weakness, also an attack we cannot use. 80 HP is pretty low, but we do play the Gloom in here. I decided to put it in more recently. I haven't tested the Gloom, frankly, since I put it in. Essentially what the Gloom is for Kyurem. Kyurem, I keep on mentioning it. It has the attack Glaciate, which spreads 30 to your whole board. And there is no good bench barriers in this format, other than Vespiquen, and Vespiquen only protects grass Pokemon as a stage 1, so it's not worth playing in this deck regardless. So we play Gloom in this deck just to protect our Oddish. It gives us 1 more turn to get that Vileplume into play if we just miss the Candy combo. But this deck is meant to get the Candy combo pretty fast, so I built that in there. Gloom's just nice to have. Like I said, if you miss the Candy combo, you have 1 turn, so if your Oddish gets hit by Glaciate for 30, you can still keep it on board for 1 more turn and let it get hit for 60. Then we have 2 copies of Vileplume. Seems pretty low, but you only need to get 1 in play. So Vileplume has the Allergy Flower. Each player can't play trainer cards from his or her hand. This is a bit confusing because this format is on that borderline Black and White to Heart Gold Silver point. So trainer cards in this format essentially means items, and it also means old trainers, so things like Rare Candy that had not yet been printed in Black and White count as items because they had been a Rodud. Trainers essentially referring to anything that you can spam multiple times per turn, right? So think about things like Ball Search, Crushing Hammers, things like that. Crushing Hammer is actually particularly relevant because Durant plays it, but the biggest thing that Vileplume is here for is for Pokemon Catcher, which is a boss's orders effect on an item card, and in this format you can even recycle that from the discard pile whenever you want with Junk Arm, another item card that you're going to see the 4 of in like every deck. So when you get Vileplume online, this format is very, very item heavy. You're going to shut off like half of the opponent's deck, which is really good. You still lose to Durant, but there is a chance that you can shut them down. But you do. This is really good against basically every other deck because it just shuts off their items, besides like the other item lock decks. Then we have 2 copies of Doduo. He does have 2 attacks that we can use. I've never used these attacks, but we'll mention them. Peck for 10, and then Double Head Strike is 2 colorless for 50, and Flip 2 coins if either his Tails attack does nothing. This can notably hit a Haxorus for 100, however Haxorus isn't very widely played. Haxorus is weak to colorless because it is the dragon back then, so before dragons existed. People don't play Haxorus though because it doesn't prevent item lock with Vileplume, so Haxorus just gets gusted up and killed, so don't worry too much about that. 2 copies of Dodrio, 80 HP. We really wish it had more, but whatever. As long as Dodrio is on your bench, your active Pokemon's retreat cost is colorless, less. This is really, really good. So essentially, Chandelure has a 2 retreat cost. So what this allows you to do is it allows you to, every turn, use 2 Chandelure's Curse Shadow abilities, because your retreat cost is now 0. It also makes Vileplume's retreat cost 0, so Vileplume can't get gusted up and stuck by like I believe there's a Bellsprout and a Drowsy that can gust up the opponent. So yeah, Retreat Aid, really, really good. There's also Lampent, stops that from trapping you. It's also got Incessant Peck. I have used this attack once in my cube. Flip a coin until you get tails. It does 20 more damage for each head, so 20 plus 20. If you can flip a lot of heads, it can save you a game, I suppose, but we don't play double colorless in this deck, so it's hard to pay for that attack. It's just mainly for Retreat Aid. Do note that if Dodrio becomes active, Retreat Aid gets shut off, so you have to pay an energy to retreat. Then we have 1 copy of Chansey. Chansey from Heart Gold to Silver. This Chansey has Pound for 20 and Happy Punch for 30. The attacks are awful on this. We're just playing it for Blissey. So we'll just stick it even under Blissey. One copy of Blissey, Blissey Prime. Does have the Strength attack, 3 energy, 60. Not really relevant. We are playing it for Blissful Nurse. Once during your turn, when you play Blissey from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon, you may remove all damage counters from all of your Pokemon. Then discard all energy from those Pokemon that had damage counters on them. So notably, it only discards energy from the Pokemon with damage on them. Kind of like Cheryl, if you've played with that nowadays. So it's very similar to Cheryl. What this is for, though, is that Chandelure actually doesn't need to attack in the late game. You'll notice about Curse Shadow, we don't need to have energy on there to use that ability. So in the first half of the game, you're going to power up your Chandelures and be attacking. But then once they're damaged and hiding on the bench under item lock, they're safe, hopefully, from your opponent. You'll heal them with Blissey, and then you'll just start swapping between Chandelures and using Curse Shadow every turn. And you can build up another Chandelure, however, it's much more difficult to do so, because it has 3 attachments, you have 3 turns. By that point, you've probably won the game anyway. Finally, for the Pokemon lineup, you'll notice we have a lot of Pokemon. It's, makes sense, it's fine. 2 copies of Cleffa. Sweet Sleeping Face, as long as Cleffa is asleep, prevent all damage done to it by attacks. It does have 30 HP, so really weak, but it can protect itself with that ability. And Eek, shuffle your hand to your deck, then draw 6. Cleffa's now asleep. Notably, it's a free attack, so we can, if we start a Litwick, for instance, pay Retreat and retreat into Cleffa, or a Doduo or an Oddish. Anything that has 1 retreat cost can pay Retreat and go into Cleffa. Chansey cannot. Do not start Chansey, hopefully. And it's just nice to get new hands. It also has no retreat cost as well, but it's probably dying to a Glaciate at some point in the game, so just warning about that. The big thing that this deck doesn't play, that a lot of decks play with Chandelure, is Pichu from Heart Gold to Silver. I don't have a copy next to me. Pichu from Heart Gold to Silver has the same Sweet Sleeping Face Poke Body, but also has the Playground attack for free. Each player may search his deck for as many basic Pokemon as he or she likes, and put them onto their bench, then shuffle afterward. Pichu goes to sleep. And what this is really good for is you can just turn 1, retreat Litwick into Pichu, or retreat Doduo, or Oddish, whatever, and then use Playground and just fill your bench, probably putting 3 Litwicks and 2 Oddishes into play. It's really, really good, right? Essentially, if you start this card, flawless start, right? But the problem is that your opponent also gets to take advantage of the effect. And this is really problematic, especially against the Electrode decks, because essentially, let's just say I'm going first, and you can use attacks, supporters, items, all that going first. I go first and I Playground, and they get to put out Voltorb. That means on their turn, they get to evolve that Voltorb. And also in the mirror, they get to evolve their Lampens, which is really, really problematic because the opponent gets to use it first. That's the problem with it. It's not a problem that they get to evolve their Pokemon. It's a problem that they get to do it first because it counts as going into play before their turn, which is really, really bad because Electro can just go into play and then they can get, 3 energy on a Kyurem and blow you up that turn. So that is why I don't play Pichu. Another tech I don't play is Jirachi. I'm going to go get that. Jirachi is a really neat card, a Stardust Song. Once during your turn, when you put Jirachi from your hand to your bench, you may flip 3 coins for each heads, search your discard pile for a Psychic Energy, attach it to Jirachi, and then Time Hollow. Choose a number of your points, stage 1 or stage 2, equal to the number of energy attached to Jirachi. Remove the highest stages from those guys. So I don't play it purely because in my Gauntlet, there is no other evolution decks besides VVV and the Electrode decks so far, at least. I guess there's Reshiflosion, but the problem with this ability, or with this attack rather, is that you can really only use it after you've Blisseyed, so you start a Song to accelerate energy to Jirachi, and it's really only good in like evolution mirrors. And when I think about the top 3 decks in this format, you're talking about Electrode variants, which blow up their evolution Pokemon for you, and you're talking about Durant, which has no evolution. So this is a dead card in a lot of matchups. It's not a card that's not worth playing. I still think it's a very, very good card. I just don't play it in mine. But consider that for your deck for the Pokemon lineup. Most Chandelure decks do play it because you can put, let's just say, 60 damage on an opponent's, or 50 damage on an opponent's Litwick, or Chandelure, and then devolve it to Litwick. It's really, really good. However, also in the mirror, if you have the Jirachi down for more than 1 turn, if you just don't flip a good amount of heads on Stardust Song, you're not going to get much value out of this card, because then they will just next turn double shadow the Jirachi to kill it. So it just doesn't have that much value in like any of the top 3 matchups. So I don't think it's worth playing, frankly. It can be devastating. Just gotta get lucky, I guess. Then we have 4 copies of Collector. Let me just sort these. Sorry, it's very difficult with my hand. I'm gonna have to do it backwards. There we are. So 4 copies of Pokemon Collector. Pokemon Collector searches your deck for 3 basic Pokemon and puts them into your hand. So remember that you can use supporters on the first turn of the game going first in this format. You can use anything on the first turn going first, frankly, besides Evolution and Rare Candy with the errata. So this is really, really good because on turn 1, I can just Pokemon Collector, grab 2 Oddishes and a Litwick, grab 2 Litwicks and an Oddish maybe. Usually want to grab 2 Oddishes so your opponent can't gust one up and knock it out and set you behind, but just really, really good. Then later game, get your Chansey and your Doduo out of the deck, and get additional Litwicks to set up as well. So really, really good card. Maybe even get like 1 Oddish, 1 Litwick, 1 Cleffa. You're probably just getting 2 Oddishes at that point though. Again, the Oddishes are very vulnerable and weak to Pokemon Catcher, so you just want to get that Vileplume in play as soon as possible. Next up, we have 4 copies of Sage's Training. So Sage's Training is here just to get us that lock as soon as possible. Look at the top 5 cards of your deck, choose 2, discard the other 3. So kind of like a Call Risk, but far, far worse. You don't get to choose 3, and you have to discard the rest instead of Lost Zoning them, which Lost Zoning is obviously a very good effect for Lost Zone decks in the modern era. Sage, not so much. Discarding doesn't really have any synergy here. It's just a punishment. But the thing about Sage is that it allows you to see a lot of cards. So we've maxed out copies of this. Just want to be able to find that Rare Candy Vileplume, the Rare Candy Chandelure maybe if I need that. Just find as many pieces as possible. Once you have your item lock set up, you're usually not using too many Sages because the resource grind of it can be extremely hard for a deck to deal with in the long term. We do play some recovery, but it is a very, very costly effect, so be careful. Next up, we have 3 copies of Twins. Twins says that if you are behind in prize cards, you may search your deck for 2 cards. So like I said about not taking prize cards with Chandelure's Curse Shadow, you can use Twins then if you don't take prize cards that aren't going ahead, and you're also more likely to get a good hand off N if you have more prize cards remaining. So the reason I don't run 4 though, so this is run as a 4 of in pretty much every other Chandelure list I've seen, is because of Electrode Prime. We'll just get Electrode Prime out. So Electrode Prime is the Energy Might Poke Power, which knocks it out, and then you look at the top 7 cards of your deck and accelerate as many energy you find there to your Pokemon in play. So what this is the key engine behind the Lake and the Cake deck, using Landorus, Cobalion, and Kyurem. Kyurem's in both decks. Landorus and Cobalion are like usually the specialized attacker. And the problem with this is that it knocks itself out. So it gives your opponent a prize card, which seems really bad for the Lake player, and Lake and Cake player, but what it actually does is it activates their Twins, so then they get to search cards out of their deck with Twins. What it doesn't do for us, unfortunately, is that since we are now ahead in prize cards when they knock out their Electrode on turn 2, we will not have access to Twins. So I do not think Twins is as good as other people think it is. I do not think it's worth playing 4 copies. You could even go down to 2, just because you really will only get to use this card in the late game. And Durant is never going ahead on prize cards either. So honestly, you could cut this card entirely if you really think you could justify that. I don't think it's entirely undoable to cut Twins, just because of how this specific meta works. 2 copies of N. So N shuffles each player's hand to their deck, and then they draw for their prize cards. Draw the amount of their prize cards, rather. In this deck, we can choose not to take prize cards because we have that spread. Obviously, if we keep attacking into the opponent's active, we're going to take knockouts. But you don't actually have to do that. Especially if you catch your opponent slacking and trap something like a Terrakion with full retreat. You are not killing that Terrakion, I promise you. Just harass it, and give it a special condition with your attack it like once with the 50 attack, just to give it special conditions, and then you're just going to snipe around it. You do not need to KO that Terrakion, it is no threat to you. So you don't have to take prizes with this deck, which is why N is so good. Honestly, like I said, if you really wanted to go, maybe if I test this list further, you know, with the way the meta is, you could even cut all of the twins just for maxed out ends. Maybe only have one twin, maybe. But we have some other good supporters we're talking about that you could even cut into as well. Like I said, this list is not 100% like I've tested it a ton, and this is perfect. One copy of Flower Shop Lady. So search your deck for 3 Pokemon and 3 basic energy and shuffle them into your deck. Unfortunately, unlike Brock's Grit later on, you cannot mix this. Why do we play this card is because we need recovery. Obviously, we have Sage, which discards a lot of cards from the deck, and there's Durant in the format. You could even, in the argument that you want to beat Durant, you could max out 4 copies of Flower Shop Lady. I don't think you need to do that, but that isn't actually a thing you can do. We do not have access to Super Rod like other decks do because we're an item lock deck, so we play Flower Shop Lady. Like I said, you know, if I really got into the nitty-gritty of this format, twins might be cut for like maxed out ends and, you know, a couple more Flower Shop Ladies just to address these specific 2 matchups better. But we'd really have to see. The format might change because of it being released on TCG1. We're probably going to see a lot of new decks be formed by players who are, you know, finally getting to test the format, because it is kind of a gatekeeping format from how expensive it is. I was looking at you, Litwick. Then we have Professor Elm's Training Method, 1 copy. This is just a search your deck for an evolution card, show it to your opponent, put it into your hand. It is really bad as a supporter card, however, it is really good in this deck because we can search cards out under Vileplume lock. We don't have to be behind on prizes like twins. This is what my 4th twins copy went into. It's just really good. We can piece together more evolutions, because a lot of times you're going to want to rush out your Vileplume, but then you can't use your other search cards, so having 1 copy of Petum still gives you an option to search under Vileplume. It can also, before you have Vileplume, search out your evolution for the candy combo. Next up we have our item cards. We're only playing 8 item cards. We're playing more than most Chandelure lists, to be honest, but that's just because we're trying to be consistent and get that item lock out as soon as possible. 4 copies of Pokemon Communication. I think this is a must. We have so many Pokemon in this deck. What do we have? What's that? 12, 15, 16, 18, that's 24. No, that's 22, 24, 26 Pokemon in this deck, so quite a lot of Pokemon. We're going to need to have Pokemon Communication, works perfectly. Reveal a Pokemon from your hand, put it on top of your deck, search your deck for a Pokemon. So trade a Pokemon in your hand for 1 in your deck. With so many Pokemon, this card is always live as long as we're not under item lock, and it really helps us get set up so we can get that item lock going. And our last item, similarly to help that item lock get going, we play maxed out 4 copies of Rare Candy. Do note that while this is not the modern looking Rare Candy that you see in Black and White era, because that actually wasn't printed until 5 sets in, this is the errata version of Rare Candy. It was errata when Black and White came out. So choose one of your base opponent and play, and then if you have a stage 1 or sorry, I'm going to read the modern print. This one technically errata. Sorry, choose one of your Pokemon and play. If you have a stage 2 card in your hand that evolves from that Pokemon, put that card on that Pokemon. And then the errata does not allow you to choose a stage 1. I almost said stage 1 there. The errata changed. It's just only stage 2. And then the way it works is that you can also not play it during your first turn or during the turn you play that Pokemon, which is a big difference. It's a huge nerf to evolution decks, probably the biggest nerf in the TCG of all time to a single, like, you know, archetype of evolution decks, because Rare Candy was so good for so long, just making stage 2s the best decks in the game, and unfortunately this print really messed it up. So unfortunate, but we still need to play 4 copies because we need a Vileplume in play. Then we play 2 copies of Tropical Beach as our stadium. Tropical Beach is legal. It is one of like 3 stadiums in the format, and the other 2 suck. So Tropical Beach is like the only stadium in this format, essentially, but it's really good. Once during each player's turn, that player may draw cards until he or she has 7 cards in hand, and then their turn ends. So this is actually really good in this deck. Notice how I mentioned earlier that Chandelure doesn't have to attack. So you can actually use your Cursed Shadows on the opponent, and then just end your turn with Tropical Beach to draw cards. You don't need to attack. Another thing is that this really helps your setup. So if you don't have access to using, Cleffa on the first turn of the game. It's really, really good to use Tropical Beach. We played 2 copies just because there is essentially no stadium competition in the game. You could go down to even 1 copy if you want to add another supporter of your choice, another N, Flower Shop Lady, Petum. There's some other supporters too in the deck. There's some in the format, like literally some versions of this deck just choose to play Sharon, draw 3 cards instead of Sage. So you can even add Sharons into the deck. There's a lot of supporters in this format. They're kind of all awkward though. Then we have our energy counts. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, 6, 7 copies of Psychic Energy. You could run 8. I cut the 8th Psychic Energy for the Gloom recently, just because you're only going to usually have 2 Chandelures powered up throughout the game at all. But I can understand wanting more just so you don't whiff the energies. You're usually not going to whiff the energies though, because you have Sage and Flower Shop Lady to get things back if you discard them. So 7 feels fine to me. That's just my opinion, at least. Yeah, that's about all. 2 copies of Rescue Energy. Rescue Energy is a unique one. It's not my favorite card in the deck. You don't find yourself using it that often, but it is there. It provides colorless. If the Pokemon this card is attached to is knocked out by damage from an attack, put that Pokemon back into your hand. So this basically only matters against the Electro decks and against attacking decks like Magnezone Prime, or decks like, if you're playing Zekrom, Electric, or, Reshifusion, or, the 6 Corners deck with all the Rainbow Energy attackers. The sad thing is that this does not work against the mirror, so if Chandelure knocks you out with Cursed Shadow in the mirror, you do not get to pick a Pokemon back up. Kind of a bonus for this deck, I guess, in a way, because it gets to get around that. In VVV, I guess it matters, because VVV is an attacking deck, and that's why VVV is strictly just way worse than Chandelure, despite having a lower energy cost, is that it's unreliable and it's an attack. It has to attack, whereas Chandelure does not, which makes Chandelure way, way better. It's just good recovery, too. Again, you could drop these for, I'd say, if you want to add another Psychic Energy in here, if you want to add maybe another Flower Shop Lady, another Petum, another N, maybe even add Sharon into the deck. There's a lot of different supporters to consider. I wouldn't increase the item count at all, but you can add a lot of different supporter cards in the deck, or maybe Pokemon like we spoke of, like Jirachi or Pichu, if that suits your fancy. That is the 2011 Harcourt Silver Noble Victories Chandelure list. Again, you can play this format on TCG1 now if you want to. It's not a great format. It's kind of ruled by Durant, honestly. Durant's probably the best deck, if you ask me. But this deck's really cool. It's one of my favorite decks. It's just in a really bad format, so that makes sense. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.